Hi, I'm Dr. Courtney. So we have a physics problem today about a parachutist jumping from a plane and accidentally dropping his cell phone. And be aware, I usually like to change the numbers a little bit so the student sees how the problem gets solved, but they need to solve it again themselves. So I like to begin with a picture. So the parachutist isn't the main issue here, but it's the cell phone. So we do have a parachutist kind of falling down here, and let's focus on the cell phone in his hand. And he drops his cell phone when he's at an altitude of 100 meters. And when he drops the cell phone, it has a velocity of 12 meters per second in the downward direction. So let's label this V initial is equal to negative 12 meters per second. And the negative helps us handle the fact that it's moving downward. And then it says, what is the velocity of the phone when it hits the ground? And a lot of students like to get cute here and they like to say, well, the velocity is 0 when it hits the ground. No, certainly a moment after it hits the ground, the velocity might be 0, but when a physics problem reads this way, it's really asking about the velocity the instant before it hits the ground. So what's going to happen here is that it says to neglect air resistance. Oh, we forgot to change the number. So rather than keep it 12 meters per second going down, so I don't end up solving it completely for the student, let's give it an initial velocity of negative 10 meters per second down, and then we'll ask about the final velocity and ignore air resistance. So we like to pause here. We like to say, well, what's the general principle of physics that's going to be used to solve this problem? And it's a projectile motion problem, or it's a falling object problem. So the general principle is really constant G. In other words, this is the idea going back to Galileo that G is equal to negative 9.81 meters per second squared. And in the absence of air resistance, all objects fall at the same rate. So there are different approaches here with the kinematic equations for the falling object. You could use the kinematic equations with the time. For example, there's an equation that says y final equals y initial plus v initial y times the time minus 1/2 gt squared. And there's also a kinematic equation saying v final equals v initial minus gt. And these are some common equations for projectile motion. But I also like to encourage students that if you have a problem where you're not given the time and you're not asked for the time, in that case you often want to use the kinematic equation without the time. V final squared equals V initial squared minus 2g delta y. And in this case, we have an initial velocity. We want to know the final velocity. And we have the delta y. It's 100 meters. And we have everything we need except for the final velocity, so we can solve for it. So let's go ahead and v final. Now, when you take the square root of both sides, you always need to be a little careful, because you always want to stop and ask, do I want the positive square root or do I want the negative square root? And in this case, as in a lot of physics problems, you want to appeal to your physical intuition. The cell phone is traveling downward when it hits the ground, so you want the negative square root. So it's negative the square root of v initial squared minus 2g delta y. And you also need to take a little care when you're plugging in the numbers here that is the downward velocity going to be larger in magnitude when it hits the ground or smaller in magnitude? It's going to be larger in magnitude. So you need to take some care with the signs here. The delta y, let's just go ahead and plug in 10 meters per second squared minus 2 times 9.8 meters per second squared times 100 meters, but it's negative 100 meters because you start at a lower place than you begin. So the negative and the negative cancels out. So it's the square root of 100 meters squared per second squared plus, now 9.8 times 100 is 9,800 times 2, I think that's going to be 19,600 meters squared per second squared. So I'll leave plugging in the numbers and completing the algebra as an exercise for the diligent student so we can get along to the next problem.